So for this video, I'm going to be reviewing each of the black creeps in Artifact and talking about whether or not they're good enough to see play in Constructed, to see play in Draft, and if they're not good enough, what are the kinds of things you would look for in the future to potentially make them become viable. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and dive right in, starting with Assassin's Apprentice. This is a 2-mana creep. It is a 3/2. It has an active that is on a 1-turn cooldown where you get to choose the combat target for Assassin's Apprentice. And the active is the entire reason that you would want to run this creep, because it does provide you with some flexibility, but the stats make this creep situationally useful. So I will say that during the closed beta, this particular creep saw a lot more play than it does now. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that gold decks and economy-based decks were far more popular in the closed beta. That's traditionally in Constructed where this card shines, and I'm going to say shines pretty loosely, but this is the kind of card that, because of the low mana cost and the flexibility of choosing targets, you can use it to hopefully kill some enemy heroes. You know, if you flop against an enemy hero and you don't have quite enough damage to kill him, you can play the Assassin's Apprentice next to it and then change its target so it's also attacking the hero. Hopefully it's early enough in the game that they don't have tricks that they can do to get out of that, whether that is play a creep in front of this or stick on a health item onto the hero that you're targeting. But that was the idea, is that you would run these in order to get some early kills and start kind of snowballing your gold generation in those decks. But those decks have fallen out of favor. They're not nearly as popular, and as such, you just don't see it a lot in Constructed right now. It's an okay card in Draft. The biggest problem with this card is that it is, as I said before, situationally useful. This card is great when you can play it into an empty space where it's not across from anything, and then use it and it's active to target something that you want to kill and get some bonus damage in. The problem is that at a 3/2, anything that ends up across from this is basically going to kill it, including just basic melee creeps, and because it's a 3/2, it doesn't even trade with them. So if you're not making use of the active, if you're not getting that kill, it's a pretty lackluster creep. It's pretty below average if you're not getting some sort of impactful play. And in order to make those impactful plays, you have to have some things that are going your way. The target that you're trying to kill has to have no way to heal or gain health in the form of like a health item. The person that you're playing against can't have any extra tricks up their sleeve for dealing with the apprentice, whether that's something as simple as a grazing shot or playing a creep in front of it. They could do so after you have activated it. So if you play this in an empty space, they can pass knowing that you have to use the active. Once you've used the active, then they could play a creep in front of it, negating the targeting. You also have to have an empty space where you want to play this and then retarget. So it is situationally useful, and that's why it's okay in Draft, and you can make some use of it in Constructed where you can kind of build around it a little bit more, but the decks that used to do so have just simply fallen out of favor. If gold generating decks become more popular, or if hero killing or specific target oriented decks become more popular, then you might see this rise in popularity. But for right now, it is a good, not great, situationally useful creep. Next up we have a Gloaty Catapult. This is a 2-cost 0/4 that deals 2 piercing damage to the enemy tower before the action phase. This card does not see play. I don't think I've ever had this thing played against me in Draft. I've certainly never seen it in Constructed. The 0/4 body means that it doesn't really do a whole lot for you in terms of trading or impacting the board. The fact that you have to wait for the piercing damage to trigger until essentially the next round because you can't cross lane play this is pretty bad. This is worse than Trebuchet, the improvement card. This is just bad. There's no way to sugarcoat it. I can only see something like this start to matter in decks where the sheer number of creeps matter, and or you have some sort of weird hero or card that benefits from you having creeps that have 0 attack or something like that. And even in the situations where like the sheer number of creeps matter, there's just better creeps to run, right? Like, you're not playing this and then hoping that the Oath buffs this. You're playing stuff like Untested Grunt that we're going to see in a moment and hoping that the Oath buffs that. Like, this is just not good. There's no other way around it. The only way this is playable is if you have absolutely nothing else to play in your draft, or if we're in some weird meta in the future where every tower has heaps of armor and the piercing damage actually matters. Otherwise, this is pretty bad. And then even when the piercing damage matters, you're going to see Trebuchet before you see this thing played. Untested Grunt. This is a 2-mana 4/2. That's it. This is like a melee creep, but in reverse, right? 4 attack, 2 health, as opposed to 2 health, 4 attack. And it costs 2 mana, so it's pretty efficient. It's a staple in many of the aggressive decks just because you want early turn plays. And the fact that it attacks for 4 means that with an Assault Ladders it hits for 6, and with the Oath it hits for a lot more. And yeah, this is, you know, middle of the road. That doesn't do anything fancy, but it doesn't need to. You're fine playing this in draft. Like I said, aggressive decks that are black do run this, so nothing to write home about. You're not high picking it in draft, but you're never like unhappy if you end up with a couple. Untested Grunt. Not going to spend a lot of time there because there's just not a lot going on. Disciple of Nevermore. This card is good. This card sees play in Constructed and in draft, and this is one of the more reliable ways to either close out and finish a tower or surprise push for 80 damage. This is, you know, a 3-mana creep that has 4 attack and 4 health, but it has -2 armor. It says other allies, so this is all of your heroes, all of your creeps. Other allies have +2 attack and -2 armor. So the drawback here is the -2 armor on itself and the -2 armor it grants to your entire team. And that's a pretty significant drawback. It means that the enemy could very easily, with some sort of board sweep, wipe your entire lane. But you're basically using this for burst damage. You're playing this when you're either in control of a lane or your opponent has already spent all of their mana and resources, and then you play this, and hopefully the bonus damage that this provides allows you to, as I said, close out a tower, secure that kill. Or if it's in a lane that you've already won and your opponent has abandoned, you can play this and get a lot of bonus damage and kind of surprise push for 80. Even if you never do 80 damage, even if you don't kill the Ancient, just by playing this, sometimes it forces your opponent into a poor situation, because then they have to come back and do something to defend that lane while also defending the other lanes that you were hopefully pressuring. So it's just a very useful card, a pretty versatile tool. Like I said, sees play in Constructed, sees play in draft. It's a very, very good card. Next up is Aghloti Vandal. This is one of my favorite cards in the game, and it doesn't do a whole lot, but it's just amazing at what it does do. This is a 4-mana 4/4 that has a play effect of deal 4 damage to the enemy tower. If you're an aggressive player, this does everything you want. Does direct damage to the tower, so it's burst damage, and if you're in a situation where you might be facing down a draw, or your opponent might be trying to stabilize, a lot of times just playing a Vandal and doing the last bit of damage to a tower can secure a game that would not have been secured otherwise, right? If your opponent's tower is at 4 health or less, but you know they're about to pop Annihilation, you can try to snag initiative, play the Vandal, and then you just secure the tower. Secure the tower before they have a chance to stabilize. If this is an unblocked creep, it represents 8 damage the turn you play it, 4 from the play effect, and then 4 because it attacks for 4, and again maybe more if you already have Assault Ladders up and going. It just hits like a truck. Because it's a 4/4, it also trades and survives with a melee creep. That means if you play this and it does the 4 damage and then it hits a tower for 4, the next turn if it gets blocked by a melee creep, it trades with that creep and survives to threaten 4 damage even further beyond. So not a lot going on, but it doesn't need a lot going on because it's just very good at what it does, and what it does is Be aggressive, be aggressive. I'm a big fan of a Gloaty Vandal in black decks that want to be aggressive, and I'm a big fan of it in draft because it's got a great stat line and a great effect, and just, like I said, does some things very, very well. Alright, next up we have Pit Fighter of Koij. I know I'm slaughtering that. I will have to listen to the lore text later on so that I can properly pronounce that, but we're going to call it Pit Fighter for short. This is a 4-mana 2/8, but it modifies itself with +2 attack when an allied neighbor dies. This card doesn't see much play in Constructed because a lot of times you don't want your allies to be dying, and if they do die, it's usually from like big board sweeps. But this is pretty good in draft. It's not like, you know, super high pick necessarily, but a 2/8 for 4 is a great stat line to begin with, and the fact that it can boost itself and you can kind of play into it boosting sometimes, so that, you know, on the first turn you might end up with like a 4/8, and a 4/8 is a fantastic creature, especially if you've played it at 4 mana, because it trades with melee creeps and it has a lot of health, so it can survive up to 4 melee creeps throughout the course of a game. So if you can play this and immediately get the trigger and turn this thing into a 4/8, it is a lot of value in draft. Like I said, in Constructed, it just doesn't see a lot of play because the 4-mana slot is very crowded, specifically in aggressive decks, which is what this would probably want to be played in, and there are just better 4-mana options. So yeah, much better in draft, not so much in Constructed right now. Stuff that might make it Constructed playable in the future is if you see more self-sacrifice effects for benefit. Like right now, Lich has his active ability. If you see some more like that, where maybe you want to play Pit Fighter and then sacrifice a creep, getting that kind of synergy going, it might rise in value, but for now, it's just a really good draft card. Ravenous Mass. I'm going to say something controversial here, and I'm going to say this card is not as bad as you think it is. So, Ravenous Mass is a 4-mana 1/1, which seems pretty lackluster, has an active ability that's on a 1-turn cooldown, and it says condemn Ravenous Mass's allied neighbors, modify Ravenous Mass with their attack and health. So this used to be a whole lot better with the old version of Cheating Death, because you could potentially like combo it and keep getting 50% high rolls in your favor and make this thing huge. But even if you're not saving whatever it is that you're trying to consume with this for it to grow, I want to talk a bit about the ways this can be used. And I've seen it done in Constructed. It's not a popular option, but in the closed beta I saw somebody who was trying it out, and it was better than I anticipated. And I also want to talk about why it's really good in draft sometimes. So if you are either close to even in a lane, or if you're winning a lane, Ravenous Mass has the opportunity to allow you to push damage through to a tower that you would not have been able to otherwise. So let's say, you know, you're threatening lethal damage on a tower and you have like, you know, a creep and a hero there, and your opponent has a creep and a hero. You can, if they've used their mana, so you're not fearing reprisal, right, or this being interrupted, you could play the Ravenous Mass, say next to your hero, and then use the active to eat your hero. Now, because this was played next to your hero, it's now in an open slot, meaning it's threatening the tower, and then when you eat the hero, all of its stats are now on the mass, which is hitting the tower. So you can use this to kind of transition damage and health into a more appropriate spot when you're trying to pressure. Now, the other reason that this card is sometimes sneaky good is that every now and then you'll get heroes that are just stranded in dead lanes, and that happens far more often in draft, and that's why I think this card is actually much, much better in draft, because it gives you an option of playing this and then just eating one of your heroes. Now, normally you're like, well, I don't want my heroes to die, but if you eat a hero that's in a dead lane, you can redeploy it. And even better, if you were considering like, well, maybe this lane might have the option of pushing an Ancient, right, dealing 80 damage, this keeps the stats of the hero that you would have left there. So the only thing you're missing is the ability to play cards at that point, Otherwise, your damage in that lane stays the same, but you get the benefit of being able to redeploy your hero. So, I'm not saying this card is amazing, right? Because it's not. But it's better than I think most people think it is, because it does provide a lot of flexibility and utility when used properly and used in those situational ways. So I don't think that it's going to see a lot of play in Constructed anytime soon, because to get the benefit you have to activate it. So it's a little bit harder to pull off in Constructed. You have to wait till they've used their resources so that you don't have fear of them slaying this or responding. You know, even if you play this and then you activate it and then they just drop a creep in front of this anyway, then you didn't sidestep the blockers the way you would intend to. So it's a little bit harder to set up in Constructed. In Draft, I think it is worthy of inclusion typically, because it's a rare. You're likely only ever going to end up with one, and I think running one is fine if you're running black, because it can allow you to do some pretty nifty things, and I think it's fine. I wouldn't high pick it, right? If there are better cards, like I would pick a Gloaty Vandal over Ravenous Mass all day. Even though this is a rare and Vandal is a common, I'll take Vandal all day over Mass. But if Mass is available, I'm not upset if I pick it, and I would still usually try to run it as a one of in Draft, because it does allow you to do some pretty neat things. So I'm just going to say I think Mass is better than most people give it credit for. Next up we have Tyler Estate Censor. This is a 4 mana 2/8, so it's got a big stat line, big body. It says the enemy tower has -1 mana. This card is good in Draft and Constructed. Both times you're usually playing this in an aggressive style deck, specifically in Constructed, because what it does is it gives you a body on the board, helps the aggressive game plan, but because it also gives the enemy tower -1 mana, a lot of times you can use this to disrupt your opponent and their ability to respond to your aggressive opening. Meaning, on a turn where you might expect them to play Annihilation, if you have initiative, you could slap this down, and then suddenly they go from 6 mana to 5 mana, and they can't annihilate you. Even in turns before that, simply playing this on the board and preventing them from developing or doing what they want to do can be very impactful. The fact that it has 8 health is a big deal, because that means it survives at any cost, and it survives hits from a lot of heroes. It is a resilient creep that is disruptive, and it is good. It's very, very good in Draft because of its size. There's even less ways to kill it in Draft, at least reliably, so it's great there. And again, that disruption. In Draft, it might be harder to predict what your opponent is doing because you won't know the deck list the way you do in Constructed, but you can still reasonably guess the hero signature cards. So if you're playing against you know, somebody that has an axe, and you know that Berserker's Call has the potential to come online at 6 mana, you can use this to disrupt that. Or against a sniper and you're trying to stop Assassinate, you can use this to potentially disrupt that. So still very useful in Draft, very useful in Constructed. One of the better black creeps in the game. And again, this kind of goes back to, you know, earlier I was talking about Pit Fighter and how there's just better 4-drops. I mean, when you consider you have like a Gloaty Vandal, you have Tyler Estate Censor, and then you've got other good 4-drops in other colors, you can see why a card like Pit Fighter just gets pushed out, because there's just better quality and more utility in some other creeps. Next up we have Sister of the Veil. So this is your Assassin's Apprentice on steroids. This is a 5 mana 4/5, and just like Assassin's Apprentice, has an active on a 1-turn cooldown where you can choose the combat target. This card, again, just doesn't see a lot of play in Constructed right now, just like Assassin's Apprentice, because it benefits the most, in my opinion, from gold gain decks, where you're trying to kill enemy heroes, get that gold, and use the gold to snowball. Those are just not very popular right now. You see a couple of them floating around, but a lot of them just focus on other cards to kill heroes. This card is very good in Draft, though. A 4/5 body is a big body in Draft, and being able to choose the target is pretty significant. It's also significant because, unlike Assassin's Apprentice, this is a 4/5, so this will still kill melee creeps and survive trading into melee creeps. So you can oftentimes get a lot more value out of this than you would in Assassin's Apprentice. So right now, like I said, not super popular in Constructed, good enough to run in Draft, got a lot of utility there. You're not really unhappy if you're running that. Next up, we have Ravenhook. This is one of those cards that just, when you get it to work, feels so good. So it's a 6 mana, 3/6, has an active on a 1-turn cooldown, but the active is condemn a random item equipped by the unit blocking Ravenhook, get gold equal to the base cost of that item. So you can only use the active if he's across from a hero, and if it's a big-bodied hero, it's probably just going to turn around and die. Ravenhook shines the most when it can be played across from like a blue hero where it's not going to die instantly, and specifically one that has an expensive item. There's nothing more satisfying than like eating a Vesture of the Tyrant with this thing, because you get rid of one of the most annoying items in the game, and then you also get a ton of gold yourself. Now, the problem with Ravenhook and why Ravenhook doesn't see playing Constructed is, in order to do that, you have to have an open slot across from a hero that has a valuable item. So you have to kind of already be losing because they've bought a valuable item. They have to have a hero that has no open slots across from them that has the item. You have to have the black hero in that lane. Then you have to play Ravenhook across from that hero. You have to hope that they don't have other items, because it does get rid of a random item. And the last thing you want to do is eat a 3 gold item instead of the Vesture. And Ravenhook has to survive long enough to activate. So you play Ravenhook and then they get a chance to respond before you get to activate it. So all of those things have to go your way in order for Ravenhook to even have a shot at working. And it's just not good enough. It's very satisfying when it happens, but it's just not happening in Constructed right now. And because of all those conditions and situations, it's likely not going to be good enough in Constructed in the near future. It's okay in Draft. Like, a 3/6 isn't a great body because it doesn't even trade with melee creeps, and 6 is an awful lot to pay for a okay creep. But if you have nothing else really to run there, you could run it in Draft, like as a utility play. The problem is that in many cases, the items that you see in Draft are not expensive items. A lot of times people start by, throwing 3 of the 3 gold cloaks in their deck. They'll have a couple of short swords, so typically Ravenhook just eats a 3 gold item even when you do get him to work, which isn't great, but, better than nothing, I suppose. Yeah, a lot of times Ravenhook is not even good enough to make the cut in Draft, but I will say, when you get Ravenhook to work, it is really satisfying. So, fun level, high. Actual, like, utility level is pretty low for a 6 cost creep. And then the last one we have is Assassin's Shadow. This is a massive 15/5 with Siege of 5, but Assassin's Shadow gets -2 attack for each ally. So, if you're playing Assassin's Shadow, you're playing it for the Siege. Like, that's really what it comes down to. It's really rare that it's going to go unblocked, and it's also really rare that it's going to be, this massive creep. You might have a scenario where you have like 2 heroes and 2 creeps in a lane, and then you play this, in which case it's a 5/5, right? So, yeah, this gets played for the siege damage. Does not see a lot of play in Constructed. It did show up in the one we played tournament, which was actually the first time I'd ever seen it in Constructed, even going back to closed beta. So I can't say I've never seen it, but it does not see a lot of play in Constructed. And, as far as Draft goes, it's okay in Draft. Like, if you don't have anything else to run, it's okay. 5 siege damage is acceptable when you're trying to close out a tower. This card isn't... the biggest problem I have is, like, this is a rare, and then when you compare this to something like Thunderhide Pack in green that has a much bigger body for only 1 more mana, and even better siege, and its body size is not conditional. Like, it's really hard to be excited for Assassin's Shadow when I can compare it to a common creep that is just all around significantly better. So, You know, if you're not running green or you didn't draft Thunderhide packs and you're in a draft and you're looking for late game siege damage, it's okay to run. It's nothing to write home about. Again, this is a rare, so it doesn't show up very often, and I wouldn't high pick this, but you know, if it fell in my lap and I have an open spot in the late game, I might consider running it in draft. And yeah, that's it. As far as like future potential, if there's ever, you know, something that is based off of like base attack value or something, because this technically is a base attack value of 15, like maybe this will see play in that regard, but it's not looking good for this in the near future. Yeah, anyway, that's it for the Black Creeps. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you watching, and I hope that you will stick around and view some more videos, and I will see you then. Yeah, thanks.